Okay, so I kind of have two titles for this. One is Empowerment, Transforming Our Relationship with Suffering. The other one is what I have up here, From Endurance Fitness to Life Fitness, Making It Count. So to me, I feel like the theme of what Team U is doing and kind of the underwriting current of the message that everybody is really working with here is what endurance, the practice of endurance does for us personally, and then the big question is, how can we make a difference in the world with that? And so rather than talking about any specific projects or visions, I want to attempt to kind of look at what it is, the underlying kind of principles that we work with here. So I'll start with this quote, less than 0.1% of the world's population has the health, wealth, political, and cultural freedom to enjoy the endurance lifestyle that we live each day. And this privilege that we enjoy, to me, comes with a global and social responsibility. I mean, I love what I do as an athlete, but if I can't somehow use that as a way of making a difference, then I don't have the same joy. Yeah, I get the chemical high from it, I get the endorphin buzz, I get to be outside, but if it's not making a difference, then in my heart I feel like it's just not pure. So, you know, we enjoy the health benefits, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. We get the satisfaction of our achievements. Those are kind of extrinsic goals. We also, again, get that kind of high that we all enjoy. And I think probably a lot of us have dealt with the kind of the addiction that can take place with that. But really, it's like, how can we make this discipline and lifestyle count for something beyond our own personal gains, and how can we make a difference in the world? And to me, that's really what Joe and what Team U are really focused on, is exactly that. And I really commend them for taking that on at this stage in their lives. I think for many of us, we don't come to those questions until far later. So, you know, as endurance athletes, every training session provides us with the opportunity to get up close and personal with the S word, and that is suffering. So Buddha identified suffering as the first condition of human existence. It's inevitable, it's inescapable. Some of the more extreme manifestations that we see in the world would be things like violence, hunger, starvation, disease, loss, grief, things that most of us, other than maybe loss and grief, probably, you know, disease. Some of the other ones are really foreign to us. They're a little more distant. So suffering, it seems like it must be some kind of a curse on humanity, like we did something wrong, that nobody really seeks a life of misery. Yet suffering really does have a function in our lives. Its function is that it's essential. It's an essential vector for our growth on every level of our existence, every level of our experience. So as looking at the relationship between suffering and fitness, and how that functions for us in the cycle of growth. So if we look at athletic training, we're really familiar with suffering, but we call it by another name. We call it stress. So stress is vital for us to build aerobic and neuromuscular fitness. It's the first of three phases in the fitness cycle. So the fitness cycle is comprised of stress, recovery, and adaptation. And all of these are necessary for growth and for our achieving the goals that we set. So during our the actual athletic training, that is the stress component, and we are deliberately orchestrating stress. So when I put on my shoes in the morning and go out for a run, I'm deliberately choosing to do that. And you know, we get to orchestrate it in the way that we can set a specific level of intensity for a specific duration, And typically the intensity is equated with a degree of metabolic activity. So the way that it improves our fitness is the stress results in damage to our body's anatomical and physiological systems. As a goal, simple goal would be, or as an example, would be going out for a 40-minute aerobic run. So hopefully I'm orchestrating just very minor damage to the joints, connective tissues, and muscles, and there always is some damage there. And if I'm including more anaerobic activity, I may increase the structural damage, and I can also damage the mitochondria and other parts of the endocrine and physiological systems. So then we go into phase 2, which is the body repairing the damage given adequate time, given adequate nutrition. So, we need to orchestrate this and be just as focused on how we recover as we are in how we stress our bodies. So the higher the stress, the longer the recovery. And then the real significant phase is probably the phase of adaptation, because that's when our bodies morph. That's when we're able to become stronger than we were before the training session. And so if we're able to orchestrate this fitness cycle over and over and over again, we're going to be able to do, reach goals that when we first envision them, we may not have the anatomical, physiological capability to do. So, through the adaptation as endurance athletes on a physical level, we're going to see stronger connective tissue and muscle tissue, more stable joints, higher mitochondrial density and capillary density, and also greater neural strength and endurance. So the benefits of adaptation for us as endurance athletes is strength, speed, endurance, and a greater resistance to injury, and hopefully more improved biomechanics, or what I call kinetic intelligence. And what I find in aging is that I tend to focus more and more on just having the perfect biomechanics, having absolutely dialed in mindful technique. So the whole component of mindfulness becomes more and more significant. And for me, the interesting or the rewarding thing is that I get older, I find that my recovery times are getting shorter. I'm definitely getting slower, but I'm finding that I'm able to recover faster than I used to. So, there's a deliberate orchestration that's taking place. And experienced and disciplined athletes know that, initially we really identify our athletic goals with the actual training. If I'm training for a marathon, the real focus is on doing those long runs every weekend. It's like, that's what's really making me get ready for the marathon. But what we may not realize is that we also need to be just as deliberate and articulate about how we orchestrate the recovery and the adaptation, because those are the components, those are as essential as the stress component is. So we need to have balance. Excessive stress obviously is going to result in injury, illness, and that prevents us from being able to progress in the fitness cycle. At the same time, if we don't stress enough, that can result in becoming couch potatoes. So too little or too much either one can create the endocrine imbalance, either one can accelerate the aging process. So we're really looking at how to maintain that balance. And to me, as I have progressed in my own experience of this, it's not just science. There's also a very, very important inner listening and intuitive component that goes into it. And it becomes more and more an art and less a science as I go. I think some of the best examples of aging athletes who've been very successful at training intuitively, Chrissy Wellington never used a heart rate monitor, never used a power meter. I think the only reason she wore a watch was because she was in her own time zone. And then Natasha Bodman, who has done Hawaii Ironman and finished in the top 10 pro female athletes at 45 years old. When she trains, doesn't even wear a watch. Never used any metrics whatsoever, trains completely by intuition and by gut. So there is some credence to orienting towards that, even in our information-driven society. So, to get back towards the suffering part of it, leaving the athletic context, you know, as humans, we have a very natural aversion to suffering. We really seek comfort. We really seek security. Nobody wants to experience the horrors of war, the desperation of hunger, the despair of disease, and the loss of life. And, I mean, that's just normal for us as humans, and for every life species. So, you know, affluent societies, what we tend to do with our wealth is we strive for security. We're looking for ways to escape suffering. We do that through surplus food supplies, elaborate medical services, powerful militaries to protect us, and creating comfortable, environmentally controlled living and working spaces. And this is all an attempt for us to avoid discomfort and suffering. And there's nothing wrong with you know, wanting that. So the interesting thing too is that we're not just looking to escape physical suffering, we also want to escape emotional and mental suffering as well. And in affluent societies such as ours, we have abundant diversions. You know, we're constantly staring at our cell phones, or we're watching Netflix or whatever. And oftentimes we're doing that. We're using the aversions to avoid having to look into the mirror, to actually look deep into ourselves and see what lies in there that is poverty, that is suffering, that we haven't really dealt with within ourselves. So we're diverting our attention outward to avoid that inner suffering of our hearts and our minds. And it's kind of like a privilege of escape. And it's obviously more characteristic with affluent societies who have a lot of adequate resources and what we would call disposable income. However, affluence is not a cure. So look at the U.S., the highest rate of consumption of any culture in the world. We also have the highest rate of mental disease, the highest rate of incarceration, and probably the highest rate of you know, one of the highest per capita murder rates. So even though we have all of these great resources, even though we've avoided hosting any wars in our country since the Civil War, and even though we enjoy the highest rate of resource consumption and have the most resources, the most access to health care and so forth, we still can't eliminate suffering from our lives. And we tend to, you know, divert more and more of those resources towards trying to avoid it. So why is there no cure? Because it seems to, you know, if we try to eliminate it, it's almost as though you've got water coming up through your basement and you're going to try and lay down some waterproofing, and then the water seems to seep up through anyway. Every solution always seems to create new problems as far as this whole thing about suffering. So every time we try to alleviate it, it actually shows up somewhere else. So no matter how much money, intelligence, force, technology, or entertainment we throw at it, suffering always just seems to be there. There seems to be no cure for it. Antibiotics, I think, is a perfect example. So, you know, antibiotics came along and they were heralded as like the big miracle. This is the thing that's going to save humanity. And for sure, it has definitely saved a lot of lives. So they're used to kill pathogens, and it's saved countless lives. However, these same pathogens will eventually adapt and become resistant to antibiotics. We've certainly seen that with TB, with other diseases. And so the interesting thing to me is that by using the antibiotics on these different pathogens, we create a source of stress for them, and then they learn how to become more fit as a result of that and create their own resistance to it. So here we are orchestrating for them the same fitness cycle. So, you know, eventually they recover and adapt, and they come back to, you know, play host, or our bodies play host to them again. And it's, again, thanks to our orchestration of stress. So the questions are, you know, if suffering is vital to health and growth of all life forms, are we doomed through eternity to experience the pain and misery and despair generation after generation? Isn't there any true liberation from suffering? So to look and consider these questions, the first thing I like to look at is mastery. So mastery, what it isn't, it's not about perfection. It's not a specific event or a specific measurable goal in our lives. It's not an all-knowing state of being. It's not nirvana, where we suddenly, are perfect with, no ability to make mistakes. What mastery is, it's a path with no finish line. It's a lifelong journey. It's a pursuit of excellence. How does this, play into the suffering? We'll get into in a little bit. So, to me, what I've discovered in terms of navigating the path towards mastery is that I just have to constantly challenge my perceptive and expressive capacity. That is my infinite potential towards experience ability. And I've seen all of I haven't seen all of the presentations, but in all of the presentations that I've seen, we always come back to the fact that rather than being of a fixed mindset, we are all, one thing I think that all of us embrace here is an open mindset, and that is we have unlimited potential in terms of being able to perceive and express. Our human capacity for experience is just unlimited. So in mastery, one of the things that's most important is beginner's mind, because in the mind of the beginner there are infinite possibilities. In the mind of the expert there are few. And honestly, in this moment, none of us have been in this moment before, so we are all beginners here, no matter what, no matter how much knowledge we bring. So again, I spoke of infinite experienceability. I really discovered this as a wild and crazy artist in my 20s and 30s. And I was like living full tilt. I slept, about 24 hours per week. It was 4 hours a night, 6 days a week. And I stayed up all night the seventh night. I was in 2 modern dance companies, doing sculptural work, and also working for UPS to support myself. So it was constant physical, a lot of body activity. And the things that I really discovered was this whole feeling of like, we really do have this infinite experienceability. We have this unlimited capacity to perceive and to express. And so perception and expression are the 2 vectors of our human experience. One is inward, one is outward. So interesting, Helen Keller, to me, represents, the thing. She had such an impact on the world, yet her experience portal to this world was about that big compared to what we have. No sight, no sound, in an age when there were no sensory prosthetics for her whatsoever. And yet, with that tiny little portal, she contributed so much insight and wisdom and made such a difference in the world. And a lot of that is due to the incredible patience and perseverance of Anne Sullivan, who worked with her. So together, Anne and Helen experienced a great deal of suffering and frustration. I mean, initially, I think when Anne started working with Helen when she was a little girl, Helen Keller was like a banshee. I mean, she was just a wild little Indian and attacked Anne and hit her and all kinds of stuff. But, they had no guidance manual to work with. And somehow they were able to orchestrate that stress and that suffering with enough recovery and adaptation. And of course, they didn't know those terms or use those terms, but they really succeeded in their quest. And they attained a high level of life fitness in what we would consider to be very, limited and handicapped circumstances. Our greatest opportunity to alleviate suffering in our lives and those around us is to exercise and empower our choice to experience the stress and suffering that we experience in our lives. To successfully orchestrate the fitness cycle of stress recovery and adaptation, not only as athletes, but in our daily lives. So returning to the endurance athlete scenario, every time I go out the door, put on my shoes to go out for a run, I'm very clear about the opportunity to orchestrate, that I'm going to be orchestrating this stress, this damage. And then I have faith and trust in myself and the universe that I will be able to then orchestrate also the recovery and the adaptation. So to me, this is kind of the real crux of how, as athletes, we're inspired towards helping people that we see suffer in the world. And that is, we're working with, in our lives, we have the clarity of being able to make the choice in our suffering. And it is a practice. So when I am running or biking or swimming or whatever my athletic thing is, it's a practice of mindfulness, but it's also a practice of context, of the power of being able to make a choice and to actually choose to take on that stress or that suffering, and then to orchestrate it and go through the recovery and the adaptation process. So there's a very deliberate choice in that. And so, the question is, can I be as clear in the situations in my life that arise where I feel like I am in a conflict with someone, that I don't point the finger and say, you're stressing me out, but can I welcome and embrace this as an opportunity for growth, so that rather than pushing it back on somebody else, that I can actually have a clarity of choice in choosing that stress and choosing that suffering. So it's a crossover for us as we gain the mastery through our athletics in our ability to orchestrate this cycle of stress and recovery and adaptation, that we want to see it cross over into potentially every area of our lives far beyond our endurance athletics. And that this is an opportunity for us to train life fitness. Life fitness follows the same stress recovery adaptation process. That's how we grow as life athletes. So being here now, one of the things that pain and discomfort, that suffering has a way of anchoring us, or even tying us down to the present moment. That it's, when we're in pain or discomfort, it's difficult to daydream or to reminisce or disassociate. And these sensations help us to be present in the moment, to be here now with what is true. And when we're in the moment, we're more apt to perceive and express the truth as it is. So in that process of the stress is that if we're navigating through life on autopilot, there's usually little potential for us to invest in any kind of growth. And this is oftentimes our tendency with affluence, is to kind of put ourselves in more of a state of ease and being able to coast and flip the switch in the cockpit and say, I'm going to go on autopilot. And that pain has a way of shutting down that autopilot. And it can be physical, mental, emotional pain. It doesn't have to, or discomfort. It doesn't have to be strictly physical. All three forms of suffering are very capable of fixing us into the present moment. So that, we've already looked at the fact that affluence, wealth in our society, doesn't prevent us from suffering. We may be able to use it to temporarily divert the suffering, but in the interim, typically that suffering incubates and strengthens. So true happiness is not immunity from suffering. However, our wealth, our free time, our adequate resources, they do offer the opportunity to transform our relationship with suffering. So resistance is futile, as we've already seen. Squandering our resources on diversions such as comfort, laziness, and so forth, they won't help us to escape suffering. They're destined to fail. And if we're diverting our precious resources towards resisting suffering, what happens is it just simply generates more and powerful extreme forms. And this is kind of the nature of polarity. When you strengthen one side, the other will naturally strengthen. The more resistance you create, the more resistance you're met with. As a swimmer, it's a perfect example. The harder you try to swim, the more the water will create resistance and slow you down. So it works very much on the same principle. So can we exercise the same degree of clarity in our choice outside of our athletic context as we do within the athletic context to work with stress, to work with suffering as an opportunity to, as a, an initiation of a growth process? And again, victimization is disempowerment. So again, as an athlete, I can be really clear about putting on my shoes and going running and doing the stress thing. And coming home, I take my shower, I go to work, and then my boss is, pointing the finger at me and telling me I didn't do this or bawling me out. And I can become the victim. It's so easy for me to slip out of the clarity of choice I had when I was doing my athletics and get into the victim role, where I'm pointing at somebody and saying, you're making me stress. So what happens in the victim thing is we fail to orchestrate the full fitness cycle. We get stuck in the stress indefinitely. We never go to the recovery. We never go to the adaptation, and there is no growth. So with the affluence we have a responsibility to invest it towards strengthening our clarity of choice and our capacity to orchestrate the entire cycle. And to really commit to this life fitness. And what happens as we do that on a personal level is more and more and more we want to also do it as a service to others. And this is when we really start to find true happiness and fulfillment. So to me, athletes and artists are very similar. Both of them appreciate the function of suffering as a vector for growth. We can diligently exercise the same skills as the artist and athlete, and that is the choice and the orchestration. And we can begin to exercise them in our daily lives. We're capable of embracing and using our own suffering and stress as tools towards growth, discovery, and fitness, and towards happiness and health. So our global function is to provide a process for strengthening our clarity of choice and our capacity for orchestration. Just as an aside, I really have never considered myself an athlete. I consider myself more an artist. That's kind of what my background is. Doing ultras just happens to be my current form of dancing or of art. And Zendurance is just mindfulness through pattern movements of endurance sports. But it's that mindfulness that allows me to orchestrate through the process of stress recovery and adaptation. So when I'm talking about embracing stress, embracing suffering, this is not about liking it. It's outside the context of athletics and art. So in my experience of doing art, in my experience of doing athletics, I often get to choose the form, the color, the size, the shape, or the flavor of my stress and suffering. And we don't always get to do that when we are in life. We don't always get to determine when it is that the stress or the suffering comes up, how long it's going to last, or how intense it is. Nor do we always get to determine the human relationships through which our suffering may arise. So empowerment, the ability to then transform our relationship with it, is we have the opportunity each day to deliberately orchestrate that fitness cycle. We develop the clarity through our training, our endurance training as a daily practice, to be present with the discomfort and with the stress, and not to go into autopilot or disassociation, not to become the victims. And then we can investigate the nature of suffering and discomfort and what our relationship to it is. And the qualities of effective practice, to me, this is how I really work with these. And we've seen a lot of this already. So many of the talks have brought up, presentations have brought up all of these things. Beginner's mind is just, as though we've never been in this moment before. We're very curious, we're like children. The finalist mind is just the opposite of that. This may be the last time ever in our lives that we have the opportunity to do something, whatever it is, go for a swim or, interact with somebody. We have no guarantees that we're going to be alive tomorrow or later on this evening. So it's no past, no future, only the present moment. And honestly, that's really all we have. So enlightenment. Buddhists pray for the enlightenment and the end of suffering for all beings. What really is enlightenment? Is there really a completion to our growth? Is there really like a finish line? And these are things that, to me, the pursuit of mastery, there is no finish line. And enlightenment for me is more that all beings can experience and exercise clear choice in our growth cycle. Not just the suffering, but also the brilliant orchestration of the whole fitness cycle, the stress, recovery, and adaptation. As far as competition, to me, the word competition comes down to the successful petition for the empowerment of companionship. And that it's in the presence of others that we're inspired to, we're empowered and inspired beyond our personal experience, beyond our personal capabilities. And that it's through the support and empowerment of companionship that we can embrace suffering, we can orchestrate the fitness cycle, and we can pursue mastery. So, we are, collectively able to, when we can collectively, as a globe, as a world, orchestrate the life fitness cycle, we no longer resist our destiny as life athletes. We no longer squander our precious resources and opportunities just trying to resist and avoid suffering. And that, currently our resistance only helps to strengthen extreme forms of suffering in the world, like war, famine, and environmental destruction. When we are really able to master this process globally as a world, the life fitness cycle, that our suffering will become more what we look at ecology, and we look at living in harmony with the planet. We talk about being more decentralized, being more local and small scale, growing things organically, this is also true with our suffering. If we are able to orchestrate that fitness cycle on a clearer level, that are the extreme forms like large wars, large confrontations will begin to break up and dissipate and become smaller conflicts that are more easily managed, that are more decentralized, that are more local and small scale. And that we will, create more harmony with the earth because we're not resisting the growth process. And that it will be more easily orchestrated and balanced with recovery and adaptation, and will lead to a liberation from victimization. So, it's the subtitle of my book. The book is Endurance. The subtitle is A Spiritual Fitness Guide for Endurance Athletes. So it's essentially that, again, we're using our fitness, our aerobic fitness, that our life fitness, our spiritual fitness follows the same training progression and dynamic that we do, in our lives. And that it's really important that we're doing this not only for ourselves, but for the world around us. And that wraps it up. Any questions or comments or anything?
What was your greatest challenge? So I know you haven't really touched upon on the biographical notes, but you've done some pretty gnarly events. What has been perhaps the most challenging moment, or maybe it was off the course?
The most challenging was, really grappling with that I loved the liberation of movement, mindful movement, and how could I create that as that passion, and how to use that as a way of being of service. For sure, that's far more difficult than any of the endurance events have been. that, and early on when I first really jumped into the whole thing, just real quickly, I had been running since I was about 19 or 20, just as a recreational thing. I'm living in Hawaii, long dreadlocks, playing in a reggae band. When the band broke up, I thought, I'll put my creative and visionary endeavors, energies into something else. So I decided to run a marathon. So I ran a marathon, got injured, and that led to, I need something to do to get my fix here since I can't run. So I was like biking and swimming. I'm thinking, okay, I'm living in Kona. For the first 8 years I lived in Kona, I wouldn't go downtown during Ironman because I knew that it would just grab a hold of me and that, it's going to be like, I have to do this. So I stayed away from, I'm like, don't even tell me about it, I want to know about it. And by the way, yesterday was Hawaii Ironman. Yeah. So I, got into the whole thing, and I volunteered on the course in '98. Went out at the Energy Lab, worked one of the aid stations on the run, went back to the finish. I've never done a triathlon. I said, I'm doing this race next year. It's like, I have to do this. Not just Hawaii Ironman as what the hype and jive, but also I had a real, very, very powerful connection with the island and with the ancestral energy there. It's really, really powerful. I mean, of all the places I've been in the world, when I go to the Big Island, especially at very specific places, I feel the mana vibrating in my bones, deep in my bones. And when I talk to my Hawaiian friends, they're like, oh, bro, it's the mana. So I'm like, tell me about the mana. And my friend Jimmy's like, oh, well, we have all these wars out here. Where I trained a lot, where I was really motivated to do a lot of training, was between Place of Refuge and Kealakekua Bay in that area on the Big Island. It's known as a real power spot. And I talked to Jimmy, whose ancestors he's direct descendant from King Keoa. He tells me, when Kamehameha and Keoa had the battles there, they would battle, and of course they're using clubs and stuff, beating each other to death. And then after, they would retreat back, and then they would both come out and they would, pick up their dead bodies and take them back. It was very important for them. And then what they did was they would take the bodies, bury them for a while until they just had bones. So they would inter the bodies and then they'd get the bones. And what was really important for them was take the bones and then put them secretively, so nobody knew where. They would take the bones and bury them in a box. But what was really important was the box had no bottom. They wanted those bones touching the ground. And the mana would go into the ground, and then they could draw off of that. And I realized, I was like, now I know why I keep feeling all this energy. And I had this really strong connection with the island. I mean, there were times when I tried to leave the Big Island, the shit would hit the fan. I'd be on my way there, and I remember one time we stopped at the post office, brand new Jeep Cherokee, maybe 3,000 miles on it. My friend was taking me to the airport. Come out, he turns the key, nothing. Won't even start. I'm like, yeah, this is normal for me when I'm heading out of there. The ancestors are like, oh no, you're not leaving. And this happened several times in different ways. So I had a real affinity for the energy there. But coming back to the whole Hawaii Ironman thing, so I said, I'm going to do this race next year. Not only because it's Hawaii Ironman, but because I really felt that what makes Hawaii Ironman the myth that it is not the hype and jive. It's the fact that it's a personification of the island itself. It's a personification of Pele. And the athletes who understand that, people like Mark Allen, Paula, even Crowley, Craig Alexander, really has a humility about the island. Those athletes tend to do really well. Natasha and Chrissy, certainly. People like Maka, what's his name? McCormick, Chris McCormick. He was just so flippant, so ego, and he got slapped around plenty of times there. He was like, I'm going to beat everybody, and his derailleur cable would break, and he'd be like, that was it, he'd quit, So anyway, so I said, I'm going to do Hawaii Ironman. So did my first triathlon in the following May, which was, no, that was my second, was Keoho, and there were 30 slots for Big Island residents. I got one of the slots there. I figured, well, it doesn't matter, no matter how much training I do, it will not be enough. And I just figured you just keep ramping up and you just go until race day, and then you do the race and pray like hell you're going to make it through. Well, 35 days before the race, I woke up on a Sunday morning and I laid in bed and I cried and I was like, holy shit, man, I'm going to die. I honestly was like, I flatlined my whole endocrine system. I was just completely like, I didn't even want to get out of bed. And it was the first time in my life I've ever felt mortal. And I was like, oh my God. I couldn't injure my body. Biomechanics was like dead on, so I had no real injuries, but I had all kinds of like signs of like that I was way overtrained. But I couldn't listen to it. I was like, oh no, I'm too, I was so scared about like the intimidation of doing this and how am I going to do all this in one day type of thing. So I had to, walk the fine line between staying alive so I could make the starting line, but training enough to make the finish line. And it was hell. And it was like walking on a razor blade for that 35 days. And I was like, if I finish this race, I have to really, amend and bring together the glorious athlete and the ordinary human being. Because if there's no ordinary human being, there will be no glorious athlete. I will die. So that was the process that started me writing my book and got me into the whole thing about, okay, let's, at the time I was married to Fatima, who was probably the most spiritual scholar I've ever known in my life. Knows more about and has read and studied every religion in the world. She's been silent now since 2011. We're not together anymore, but we're still good friends. She's been absolutely silent since 11/11/11. She's done green Tara practice forever.
What do you mean by silent exactly?
She has not spoken.
Okay.
Yeah, she's been on. And so when I'm writing my book, the book, Zendurance, the Spiritual Fitness Guide, she's also doing her first silent retreat, staying on our farm, wearing white, shaving her head, no speech, no media, no diversions, just her mala, gardening and beading and praying, and that was it. And I'm witnessing this, someone who's doing this, no guidance from any Tibetan lamas or anything, and watching her go through her skeletons in the closet kind of thing, the dark stuff that would come up for her, but watching the whole process for her. Here I am as this, chasing Ironman thing and writing this book, and I had done one Ironman, but that was like, training for more because that was how I was writing the book, was through the training. So it's really interesting to see the relationship between this traditional spiritual practice and what I was doing as an athlete and saying, I'm really clear this is what my spiritual practice is. I just don't know how to articulate it yet. So, and her like constantly questioning me and being like, why are you doing this? And really making me have to look at that. So that was, a very long answer to your to your question about, what was the hardest thing. It was really dealing with the discrepancy between I love doing this and, how can this be grounded in a healthy life, not just for me, but for, everybody I come in contact with. Any other questions?
Has there ever been a point where you were worried that as an artist, your stress was beginning to become a suffering of itself, where you almost didn't have a choice, or where it was going to put you in a position that you weren't comfortable with?
Where I think, look at someone who suffers the atrocity of war. And there are people who do that who never recover. And there are also people who suffer the atrocity of war who rebound, and they're like, I love, what was Michael Vitez, was that his name?
Yeah.
The guy that he wrote the story about, his ability to like heal all that stuff, and all the doctors are like, I have no idea how he did that. was his clarity of choice. He never looked back. It wasn't like, what if? It was like, this is where I'm going, you know? And I think that's a really huge part of it. But there were certainly times where, I almost killed myself. I literally almost died out of that process. And that wasn't the only time, from that. I mean, I've dealt with chronic adrenal fatigue a few times, never again. I mean, I'm pretty healthy now. I really know how far I can go and then back off. And there's a lot less, like Lisa was saying, there's a lot less attachment now. If I don't get my run in today, okay, it's not so critical anymore as it used to be. And I think it's partly just aging. Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. And to me,
Not
it's
sitting around doing nothing.
yeah, and it's craft. I mean, as my craft as an athlete is also I live it. I don't just, it's just not like, oh, I do my run and then I'm done and I'm going back to just dealing with this shit in my life. It's like it's all part of the same craft. So the way I approach my running is the same way I approach anything else in life.
I loved your logic. It followed perfectly to the end. Pope John Paul II wrote an encyclical on suffering. Have you read that?
No.
And his whole premise was that suffering releases love, and if it doesn't, you keep suffering. And it's exactly what you said.
But and it's the thing for me is one of the most amazing things. So the real premise in my book is it talks about triathlon, swim, bike, run, the 3 sports. But also, and the whole book was absolutely a channeling process. I was living on the Big Island. Again, I'm channeling the ancestors all the time there. And there was no choice in that. I mean, they're like, we're using you. I'm like, cool, whatever. That may sound really, really like, oh yeah, right. But again, I had all these like graphic things happen that for me was like, I'm not in control here. But it was a reciprocal thing. So it's that in that suffering part of it, and in the channeling is the growth. I don't know how I got on that. Why I was going into that.
First of all, this morning the workshop was awesome. In between you and then going to Meg, I was blissed out how I got to my part. My question is really to you, sister. What I do is, somebody once told me, you take suffering and you make it a service. Unfortunately, I'm around a disease that's so insidious, it's just, the numbers are going to just keep escalating because it's, statistically, it's not a good card to have. So I sit there and I'm like, I'm worried to God. I haven't figured out how to deal with mortality. And I'm around death, and I can't run away. So I compartmentalize. That's the only way I can deal with it. I look at all the stuff that I'm hearing, and passion, and find your passion and go after it. I didn't choose this. My daughter was put here. I really believe that. And I'm an Irish Catholic guy. I did everything I could when I was going to church, trust me. But there was a bigger force. That's what I felt with you this morning. And we're not whack jobs, This is real stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it because I see these children enduring. And you asked me to come here. And I'm like, endurance. I ran 2 marathons years ago, just for my daughter. And you guys are all nuts for running ultras. I just think you're crazy for running. I wouldn't recommend anybody running a marathon. But the whole endurance, I have a different set of lenses that everybody looks to here. You come in here with sport. I'm looking at these children. And if I bring in 10 kids with brain tumors here, they're the happiest kids you ever want to meet. If I bring in 10 normal people, they have more issues than 10 children with brain cancer. And I can't figure it out. But I know I have to go for training for mortality, but I sit back and I think, what is it? And again, the disease doesn't discriminate, so I look at everybody on a level playing field. Whether you're a rabbi called me after the HBO, he says, come in and talk to my class. I'm an Irish Catholic guy, and a rabbi asked me to come and talk to his prayer class. And I'm like, I have a different perspective on prayer now and faith than I did growing up. But I don't know how to handle the death. You know, I just don't know how to handle the death. And I look at priests, and I look at rabbis and other religions, and if you think what they do in their little villages, you know, they do baptisms, they do confirmations, you know, they do weddings, but they do funerals. That's part of their job. And I don't know, so my long question to you is, have you been around it? How, you know, what's the advice that you can give a normal person? I'm just a brain tumor dad.
I have been around it. I work a lot with children that are orphans from AIDS, and every 14 seconds, a new, they're called childhood household is formed. The mother and father have died from AIDS. In Ethiopia, they're having funerals every day, 2 or 3 times a day. I know a boy, instead of a 24-hour McDonald's, he's started a coffin shop, and he's 16 years old, you know, and he sells coffins 24 hours. But you have to, how to deal with it. I think like when you were born, you didn't want to be born either. You probably fought and were screaming on your way out, right? And then you have your life to live, and then this is the death is the next part of the journey. And since we have
The Aborigines wish you well on your journey when you're born, and they wish you well on your journey when you leave.
It's also,
And you do continue.
There's-
You continue.
it,
You have to believe that you do continue.
the part of you that doesn't know how to deal with the mortality
Spirit.
is this part here. This is in Hawaiian, this is mana'o, okay? Mana is energy, o is singular, is a piece of it. This intelligence is really good at creating separation, and that's necessary in order to be an observer. You can't observe something if you're not separate from it. This intelligence is the connector. It's all light. And coming back to what she said about suffering is, you know, if you don't grow, you're going to keep suffering. And it's the breaking open of the heart. And if we exist always in the mind, the mind is trying to keep the heart closed, because the mind believes that it's a separate thing. And it doesn't want to let go of the separateness. This intelligence is completely worldwide. It's everybody connected together. And the way that we bring these two together so that they can work together in harmony is right here. This is right between these two. So the voice becomes, and if we speak only from emotion, then we're imbalanced there. If we speak only from logic, we're imbalanced there. All the wars in the world, in my opinion, have been fought between the heart and the head. So right now, all the wars that are happening, especially around Islam, they're the heart, which is why they're beheading. And the way that we as being the other side of it, you know, I'm kind of taking a polarity here, the way we respond is to do this in a very scientific, exacting way, you know, airstrikes, whatever. But the wars will end when we can bring these two together, which is, you know, what we need to voice is gratitude, always voicing, you know, a harmony between these two. So spiritual practices, spiritual fitness for me is, and this is the big component of my book, is this intelligence, this intelligence, this intelligence. This one's, the purpose of this is to take things apart and be able to be the observer and the observed and make, you know how things work. This intelligence knows how to connect and make everything the same entity. This intelligence is the intelligence of action. In all spiritual practices, in all religions, there's a Trinity. And the spiritual practices that bring these two together are primarily meditation and yoga, which is through conscious breathing and the breath. And it's the union of these two. Prayer and devotion, bring these two together. Diet and service, which is giving and receiving, bring these two together. The circulation, the action. And so in life, I know I had the great gift of being married to Fatima, who's a Brazilian Indian, okay? The red race is so heart-oriented. You go to Brazil, they are so passionate and so in their hearts. But in their minds, these people mount propane tanks on the front bumper of their cars. Okay? They're not really thinking like, too far into the future because they're so passionate. So I'm married to this woman who is very strong in these two intelligences, but not very strong in her body. And I am here and here, but not here at all. And it was so stark to me. I'm like, oh my God, I am so not present in my heart. And in her presence in her heart, because she works so much from there, the synchronicity in her life floored me. I mean, every day, the synchronicity and the way she could manifest whatever it was that she needed to support her in her mission would happen because she was so present in the heart. And when we separated, it was and that was right when I left Hawaii. The hardest time in my entire life was leaving Hawaii, my marriage dissolving. I mean, it wasn't, we just had reached the end of our spiritual contract. No longer my identity as the local Hawaiian boy. No more my working in the coffee fields. Everything in my life completely dissolved all at one time. The floor fell out. And I had to, the most important thing for me was I had to begin to open my own heart instead of relying on the Hawaiians, their culture, and Fatima. And that was the hardest part of my life. But it was like, I have to embody that now. I have to embody that heart intelligence. But the work that you're doing is breaking your heart. It's breaking your heart over and over and over and over again. And it's bringing you from here and bringing you more into a balance and having all that. I mean, that's just what I offer in terms of what I see with what you're saying. And I think ultimately what we're all doing is learning how to balance these three, the Trinity, the Holy Trinity, and how to be stronger. The triathlon's such a great example. It's like if you want to be really good at triathlon, train your weaknesses and maintain your strengths. So if you're weak in swimming, train that, but maintain the other two. Same thing with these. Yeah, if you're weak in one of these intelligences, work on that one and maintain the other ones. It's so similar. It just amazes me. Anything that anybody wants to add? Any of that?
I worked in Sloan Kettering with the pediatric.
That's where we get treated.
Pardon?
That's where we get treated.
Okay. And there's, the little ones coming in and some are getting cured, but a lot of them stay and they die.
Right.
But if you stay with them, the child themselves, after a while, they accept it. They know this is it and they're getting closer to the end. They accept it. It's the mothers and fathers that can't stand it. And that's what's breaking your heart, because you're a father probably yourself, and you can't let go. The kids themselves are able to handle it. But I think, like you said, the meditation of it, the more, learn yourself. Why are you don't want to let this child go? That's probably what it is more than anything else. But, you have to keep working with yourself. That's the hardest part. I'm sorry for your suffering.
Well, I look at the glass half full. That's the only way I can deal with it, because I give them the opportunity to enjoy the short time of life they have left.
Right.
That's the only thing I
Every
can
day,
focus
every
on.
moment. The same with the sport too. Every.
And the truth is,
Anything in life.
we're all terminal.
Yeah.
We're all dying. Every one of us.
Sorry to end it on that note.
But it's a peacefulness.
It's
a peacefulness and it's reality, and it's a
Yeah.
peacefulness in
It's-
life.
it's-
In death, there is peace.
And
In life, there is
honestly,
peace.
if we weren't facing mortality,
Every
would you
day.
bother getting up in the morning? If you knew how life was going to go,
For it.
would you bother getting up? I don't think so. The fact that there's mortality, the fact that we're all going to die, kind of gives us a little bit of fuel. It's like, wow, I better get some growth done while I'm here. When I die, I want to go easy. I want to be like, that was a great life. I lived it to the hilt. I'm ready to roll. I'm ready to go
And
to the
the fact
next
that you're
journey.
helping somebody else or even being with somebody else even makes it greater.
Yeah,
It makes the whole journey even greater. Even
you are
if it's 1
living-
minute or
you're
5
living it
minutes,
out.
You're living it.
By being with
And
that
don't
person.
keep it half full. I mean, fill it up. Fill it up because it's worth filling it up. You want to have a full cup, not a half full cup. You want that cup running over. You want to be able to say, my cup runs over, and over, and over, and over.
And your love is infinite. It is pouring out of
Absolutely,
you.
It's pouring out. And you're holding it back. Give it. Use it, give it. It's an incredible gift. And you have it. And you're afraid of it. Don't be afraid of your gift. The gift of love is absolutely beyond remarkable.
So cool that this is the context that we bring the athletics
It's about
into.
love.
It's so
I mean,
beautiful.
isn't it all about love?
Yeah.
That is life. Life is love. That is, at the end of the day, at the end of anything I've ever done, ever, every day, the word is love. Love your neighbor, love your friend, love your enemies, love one another.
It's ultimately, it's what
It's
all,
not all
it's,
about me, babe.
Well, you're talking about all your awards and stuff like that.
I don't
I'm
know
at,
about
but I'm
any
at
of
the
those.
same point. I
No,
mean,
but
I've been,
but none of those mean anything to
I
me.
know, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's
I get-
about love, the people I've loved along the way, and, I mean, at the end of our life, what does it come
when you're
down
laying
to?
on your deathbed, what's going to count?
None of my awards, they're meaningless. They mean something while I'm doing them and I'm enjoying the journey and the process and all that, but I could care less. My kids don't want those buckles, they don't want any,
But the
they want me
experience
to love them, and the experience is
and
what
how we
you
share
can
and,
teach and share.
yeah.
But it's really, at the end of the day, hope and love. Hope and love. Without hope, there is no love. Without love, there is no hope. And if you live with hope, you live differently. People with hope live differently. People who love deeply, love deeply. I'm a very emotional person because I love deeply. And it's not something you just wake up one day and that's where you're at. I mean, it's learning and it's practice and it's wisdom, and it becomes with immense gratitude from experiences that you've gone through, day after day after day, and then you choose love. You choose love. I mean, I've heard, oh, I hate that. I've heard that a few times. I thought, God, the word hate is really powerful.
Mhm.
Like the word hate radiates my bones. The word love is softening and beautiful and generous and kind. And that's who you are. Don't be
Yeah,
afraid
for
of it.
sure.
Don't be
You're
afraid.
very
I
generous,
see
you're
it.
very
It's glowing
kind.
all over you. Don't be afraid
Yeah.
of it. Use it. Use it or lose it. Isn't that one of the things?
Yeah, use
Either
it or
use it or
lose it.
lose it. I think that's when you end this whole conference on love. I mean, really. We love what you guys have done here. I mean, you brought together remarkable
Yeah,
people.
Joe, this is like,
Including
you
yourself.
guys,
It's the entire team
Tom.
here.
No,
guys
it's
are
the entire
amazing.
team.
John
Somebody
Pablo,
had to,
Roderick,
somebody is a leader.
John.
Somebody had to start it. You're amazing, remarkable people. And the greatest gift you've given to all of us is, I would have never, I know his name, but I don't know him. Life goes on. Like, I know Travis Macy, I know Ann Tracy, but, when you look at, like, and you meet him and you sit down with him in a completely different atmosphere that we're used to, it's remarkable. I mean, I'm thrilled to know this person that all, what he does and what he's accomplished and what he's doing for the world. I would have never known it about him. I would have never had this opportunity, without your team here and you. So, I mean, it's pretty cool for us as well, by the way. So,
very cool.
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
It's way cool.
yeah.
Well, I don't think there could be any better way. I was thinking like, how should we close it? But I think
No,
that's
what,
it.
your
Go with
sharing is
love.
so beautiful. I
Go
mean,
with
it
love
really
one another, right?
it capped everything.
Love
What
one
you just,
another and
how you-
do
how
good
you-
in the world.
what you just elicited out of this is really the essence of why we're all here. And to me, it's exactly what, what Joe is and all of Team U is really about.
Thank you.
It's really
Thanks, Joe.
beautiful.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate it.